Yeah. Welcome back to the I'm a Good podcast. Well, Dan, it's nice to hear the sultry sounds of that little piano intro. In a little while, just a couple of weeks from now. Nice to be back. Minneapolis, Minnesota is bright and sunny today. First day in a long, long time. So it was pretty good. And they're going to be, 30 degrees and all that. Dan, that's Minneapolis, weather update. How about weather and traffic out of South Bend, Indiana?
Traffic is slow. It's going to take you 10 minutes to get all the way across the city. But we got snow and sleet. It's kind of gross here.
Ooh. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the same weather system, but it does feel like from where I am in Minneapolis and where you are in Indiana that the weather sort of moves that direction. And maybe sometimes that's what we had the last couple of days. Super heavy and cloudy, and good to see the sun. Hey, but I was off seeing the sun down there in Mexico the last a couple of weeks ago. I don't know, 2 weeks ago I left. I had a longer than expected stay in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, to get back into the country, into the United States, every person, including U.S. citizens, has to present documentation of a negative COVID-19, SARS-CoV-19 test, right? So still very restricted set of conditions for someone to travel back into the country, at least by airplane. And you get the test there, typically the day before you're going to fly. It has to be within 24 hours. Previously, it was like, 2 days or 3 days. So you had a little bit of time, but now it's the day before. So my wife and I, we got our COVID test the day we were traveling. We were supposed to fly out at 5 p.m. and we did our tests in the morning about 10 a.m. and they come back very fast. And about 1 o'clock, I look to see, get all of our travel documents together, passport in hand, look at the email to see about make sure we get a screenshot so we can quickly and easily pull up the negative SARS-CoV-19 test. And lo and behold, mine says positive. And it wasn't like, positive outlook. This wasn't some, magic 8-ball, things are looking positive for you. Looking on my phone and seeing that, the little small text of the whole report, and then this big, bold positive, it was like my brain just started thumping, the worst. We had made all the jokes that people make, like, hey, it's a good thing we're staying at one of these fancy resorts because they guarantee you a negative COVID test going home, all that stuff. And I have traveled extensively outside, almost all outside travel over the last couple of years, and have been surprised. I've never gotten a positive COVID test, and I have taken so many COVID tests. I mean, I have stuck that swab up my own nose. I have had professionals stick the swab up my nose. I've had, I think just rando strangers do it for me. I've been tested and tested and tested, and always negative, always negative. And then last Tuesday, bonk, 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 bonk.
Finally gotcha, huh?
Well, I finally got a positive COVID test.
Right.
0 symptoms, so I was totally surprised. Well, I mean, I'm like, okay, Shell, we got to figure out what we're doing here because we're leaving for the airport in like 12 minutes. We're getting into a cab. I got to figure out what to do. So I start walking around the resort, I put on 2 masks and start walking around the resort and talking to the people and saying like, okay, I just got a positive test. What are my options? Lo and behold, they have a special part of the resort, a special building that they'll put you in and you go there. And so I had to go back to our room that we had checked out of and sit in there and wait. And Shelly gets her stuff together. We're just in a frantic now, having to unpack bags. I'm keeping a bag like it's crazy. She ends up taking my passport instead of hers. She's halfway to the airport, gives me a call, has to turn around. I mean, it's just a comedy of errors. Just bonkersville. A guy shows up at my door, at the hotel door, and the people at the desk called and said, hey, he's going to be up there in a minute. So just be aware because, he can't come into your room. So they want to make sure that I didn't, miss hearing him knocking on the door. So I open the door and there is a guy standing there from the resort, like the bellboy, who now is in full hazmat suit. full white deal, covered,
Wow.
and he's got to take my bag and ushers me down and puts me into a little cart and drives me over to another place where and when I opened the door and looked out at him, I saw that there was another person standing sort of down the hallway, and I said, "Are you my security guard?" He goes, "Yeah, I am." So they've sort of quarantined me there, take me to another place. End up in there. I'm trying to get a COVID test. Finally, Wednesday, went and was tested again and tested negative. So I booked a flight home and then for Thursday, and then tested again on Thursday before I left and was negative, and then flew home and tested when I got home on Thursday and was negative, and then tested on Friday and was negative, and then tested on Saturday and was negative. So glad to report, either I got a false positive test, which of course everybody in my life said, yeah, you and Donald Trump with your little false positive test, that's what you're claiming. Because remember when he first got tested positive, and there's like, no, that can't be right. And then they retested him. It came up negative, and then he went to the debate with
Negative, which was positive in a sense. Went on that whole little rant about.
Yeah. Negative is positive because, that's good news. And then the difference between me and Donald Trump is then, this number of days later, he was in a hospital bed on a ventilator because he had COVID the entire time. I fortunately either got a false positive test or 5 subsequent false negative tests, or worst case scenario. That was my last day. Tuesday was my last day of being infected, and I was roaming around.
Just gave it to the whole resort.
Just like a vacation super spreader.
Yeah.
Anyway, feeling fine. Always have felt fine. Really think about all the people who didn't fare as well when they got their positive test. But it's just had me thinking a lot about all these tests. And, I remember back in December, I was trying to get a test because I had driven across the country and wanted to get a test when I got home, and could not find a test for my life in Minnesota because they had, the government did not force the test makers to continue to make tests through the fall. So they were out of them. And now, I went online and ordered them from the government, and they came in 2 days. So now we're awash in tests around my house.
As it should be. You should be able to get a test anywhere, anytime.
Totally.
Yeah. I've had a little cough for the last few days and tested negative thanks to the kit that the government sent me when I signed up. So a little symptomatic, but maybe it's a false negative. I don't know.
This is the hard thing. And, and I've been of the opinion false negatives happen because it's hard for it to find the virus in your body. That's a thing that's difficult with any kind of a liquid based test like a swab. A false positive, much less likely, right? It's very likely that this thing is going to register that there's virus when there wasn't any. It's much more likely that it's not going to register some if there is. But so I'm making no claims other than I can only think of 3 options: false positive, subsequent false negatives, or it was my final day of being infected with no symptoms at all, not even a drippy nose. The only time I had a drippy nose was after they pulled that swab from the back of my brain. Then my nose got a little drippy. So that was it. But hey, look, it feels to me, I don't know about you, Dan, it feels like we're on the other side of COVID, and now we're able to figure out, sort of what's happening. Do you have that sense that we're at the end of the COVID?
I feel like everyone is anxious to be on the other side, and so maybe we're viewing things a little rosier than they are. But numbers are going down in most places, which is good. But we're still on track. Like, we're seeing death reports of over 2,000 every day still. That's like a 9/11 every day. And we're on track to hit 1 million COVID deaths by April. And so while things are getting back to quote unquote normal, it's still going on.
Yes, still going on. And the brutal reality, which people have been talking about and wondering and thinking about, is that if you get the vaccine, you are not going to be hospitalized or die of this, with the rare exception. Mm-hmm. That is just seeming to play out as statistically true. whatever people's view of the vaccines are, they seem to absolutely work to prevent people from being hospitalized and from people dying, because all of the death cases and all of the hospitalizations, save a few, are from the unvaccinated. And just the sheer numerical difference between people who contract COVID and can live with it normally and people who are deeply affected by it, at least by hospitalizations or death. The difference is if you're vaccinated or not. That's that. It's not even like there's, vaccinated people who are kind of, because remember there was a lot of worry early on about breakthrough cases, because a lot of us were thinking that if you got the vaccine, that was going to lower your viral load enough that you wouldn't even test positive. And that was true with Delta, but not with Omicron. So anyway, all of this is a thing that I do think we're now at the point where they're going to start to refer to this as endemic, which is this word they use in public health, difference between pandemic, where something's running out of control and can't be limited without severe human behavioral change, to something that we can figure out how people live with this. And there are multiple responses from medications and treatments and hospitalizations and, of course, vaccines to help people not experience all this. So I think we're really, like 2 years ago to the day, you and I were on a bus somewhere around this day, I think, in traveling the country, trying to stop the other pandemic that was running through the Republican Party of people voting for Donald Trump. And I think we were like in South Carolina or something like this, making our way down to Florida. And it was really starting to become clear that there was a problem. And I don't remember when now exactly which day. I seem to have March 13th in my brain as the day when the walls came tumbling down and everything.
I think a few days before that, we were in Anderson, Indiana, because I remember that was the last tour date I did, and then like 2 days later, everything shut down.
Man. And I remember when the word came out that the WHO had declared this a pandemic. And that was a moment and it was very hard to know what the Trump administration's was thinking about it or saying about it or doing about it, because like everything else in that administration, it was just chaos and blithering nonsense galore. It's all going to go away. Don't worry about it. All that stuff. So it was really hard to know who to listen to and who to trust, and didn't even know the name Fauci at the time, other than from some distant memory of AIDS research from back in the 80s. His name was sort of vaguely in my mind. All of a sudden, the WHO saying it's a pandemic, that's a big deal. And so I think that when we reach a point where it can safely, by public health standards, be declared endemic, not the end game, but something you live with, that is actually a big deal. And I have a lot of people in my life who are very COVID cautious by their own statement, and they really don't want us moving on so fast. But I think it's going to become something that we're going to start to live with and move on from, and maybe people like me who are 3 times vaccinated contract the virus and never have symptoms. I don't know. Maybe that's just sort of how it's going to go. And, maybe now I'm super immune, like the super immune people that have been vaccinated and have it and feel like, wow, they're really great. And there's still a lot of vulnerable people. Mm-hmm. And it's good to remind ourselves there's a lot of vulnerable people for a lot of health issues. I living like you do in a state where it's freezing cold and frozen rain and snow all the time, I just constantly think about people whose bodies aren't able to navigate snowbanks and snowy sidewalks and slippery ice area. Like, there are so many things that make life dangerous and hard for a set of people that we don't often think about. And maybe COVID will open our eyes and make us a little bit more aware of the people for whom, they're really super freaked out by all this stuff. So they'll likely wear masks and want people to wear masks and, and do all that. But boy, I'll tell you, the mask wearing feels like it is going away in a hurry. Everywhere now, and I live in a very mask wearing state, and even on the airplane flying home from Mexico, they barely made a mention of it. People had their masks out and they were saying, no, and other times they've been very, very
Right.
on top of that, making sure people keep their masks on. But it just feels like, man, we're on the other side of this thing and there's just no getting it back.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully people will, like, there's certain areas of society where you're crammed into a subway car where maybe it's still a good idea to wear a mask. Like, COVID aside, we don't want whatever it is you've got. So maybe there's still some things that can stick around that will protect vulnerable people. But I think the mandates are gone. Yeah, there's no getting that back.
This is what's going to raise a really big question for us about the best way to deal in public health, the best way to deal with airborne viruses. Is it to be infected to a degree that your body is ready to respond, or is it to be someone who doesn't take in those airborne responses? And there's some public health people that I've heard of that are like, look, they're concerned about people being too protective because your body needs to build the immunity. Like, our bodies are supposed to and are designed and are able to take care of viruses. There are times where a very aggressive virus or a very weakened immune system isn't able to do that. But for the most part, your body is supposed to take care of that. And this is kind of the difference between the people who, don't let their kids be around others that are sick and the people that are like, the kid's going to build some immunity to the cold. That's what's going to happen. This is how it goes. I think that conversation is yet to come in our society and will be happening not just for that brief period of time when parents first put their kids in school and they start coming home with a runny nose, or every, elementary school teacher, as you know well, that comes home, in the start of the fall with like, oh my gosh, I've got the fall cold again because we're all back in this place. That's going to become its own conversation in our society. And I think we're probably worse off now in being ready and able to have that conversation in a healthy way than maybe we've ever been. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's funny is as all these mandates are lifting, there's this trucker convoy. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the trucker convoy that's maybe now in Washington, D.C., protesting vaccine mandates and mask mandates that haven't really existed at all in the United States. And what few have are lifted.
Yep. Look, the freedom convoy thing, like if your big cry for freedom is you don't want public health people to put public health measures into effect, that's just going nowhere. Like, that is just like, social movements, they need to be rooted in something that people actually want. I mean, what's the ultimate end of all that nonsense? We don't want public health to exist. We don't want public health mandates. We don't want spinach being pulled from the market. We don't want Tylenol being regulated. We don't want masks to be worn by general population in certain high impact moments. That's just, I don't know. For the very small group of people who are so bothered by the fact that the government won't tell me what to do or tell my kids what to wear on their face, that is just going nowhere. Now, I will say, I've been hearing politically that there's a whole lot of really mad parents wanting to blame Democrats for their kids having to wear masks in school. And I don't know where all that's going to go, but this idea that there's one, it is just, there are so many things, though, and I'll probably get to the second thing I'd love to talk about today, which is former Attorney General. There are so many things in our world right now that I truly cannot bring myself to understand or get myself to understand what's the end game here. Like, what would you rather have, right? Every social movement has a series of demands, either implicit or explicit. I don't know what this freedom convoy wants. I don't know what the anti-mask people
want. Freedom. Want freedom, Doug.
I want freedom.
Yeah, I was talking to my son the other day, and we watched the State of the Union together. He's 12, about to turn 13. Let him stay up late, And then we watched the response to the State of the Union from the Republican responder. And she went on this little tirade about masks in schools and how it's, basically, oppressing children. And my son was like, what is she even talking about? Like, it's not hard to wear a mask. Like, I forget about it halfway through the day, like it's not a very difficult thing. It's like, I don't think kids are the ones like begging for, mask mandates to be lifted. It's the parents. And it's not really about the kids at all. It's still about some nebulous idea of freedom.
Yes. And that who's going to tell your kids to do what and where.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this before. Since the advent in the mid 1920s of the public school movement in the United States, there had been public schools before, but a mandate by the federal government that a child has to attend public school or an equivalent up to the age 16 and through grade 12. They can drop out at age 16. That demand that was put into our society, there have been a group of people who have been mad about that ever since, and they have reproduced themselves. And that's basically what comes down to a lot of the anti-school movements and the private school and the charter school movements. There is a 100-year-old fight going on about the power of the federal government to make demands on children.
Yeah.
And without, if people don't know that that's a thing, and that's where prayer in school and other school, all that school stuff, it is not just a person that's like, hey, we're all trying to figure out how to make this best for our kids so that they can be equipped as socially and emotionally and educationally informed and healthy people. That's not what drives the anti-school power movement. It is, and Betsy DeVos, the former education,
from my home state of Michigan, pretty familiar. Yeah,
she's in that world and she's in that camp, and there are just things that people don't think the federal government should do, and that many of us have just assumed that's decided. That's a decided fact. That's just over with, and other people have said no, it's not over with. And the reason you got to, I have laughed those people off, like I've laughed off the, reverse Roe versus Wade argument for decades. Like, this is just settled. Just move on. It's like the Civil War. It's like the Revolutionary War. It's like the Great Society. Like, these are things we've decided, and now we're just going to keep going with those as assumptions. There are a whole lot of people saying, oh no, those are not assumptions. And the anti-Roe versus Wade people worked until they finally got the people in the position to threaten it, which they're going to. Yeah. So I only bring that up to say those issues that have been going on for 50 to 100, 120 years, the Confederate flag being one of them, they are still issues that animate and motivate a whole lot of people. And you wouldn't know that's what's going on, until a freedom convoy comes rolling through, or people take over a school board.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We met a woman. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, at this point, it's a concerted effort to take over local school boards to initiate change.
Yep. Yeah, that's where they're going to do it. We were at this, and we were on vacation in Mexico. A couple of people were sitting next to us at something and said, "Oh, what brings you here?" And this woman said, we're from Iowa, or so we're from Minnesota. All this, like, it's like 4 questions you ask somebody, like, how long's your vacation? Where are you from? Yeah. How cold is it? And have you seen the server? Like, those are the 4 questions that you basically ask. Well, it turns out this particular person in central Iowa is a special ed instructor. She said, well, actually, I said, well, you guys on spring break right now? Or like, how come you're here? And she said, well, actually, I took personal leave because I had our kids, the 6 kids she works with in special ed, read a book that involved a transgender character. and the parents went crazy.
Yeah.
Are having her fired or removed from the school. The superintendent and principal won't stand up for her. It's full on. And so we just had a whole conversation. We ran into these people 3 or 4 more times over the course of the vacation, and just heard more and more of the story. And so these parents, and the way she put it, she said it's actually a very small group of very vocal and committed parents who are doing this, and they're just making everyone's life horrible, and no one in the system knows how to deal with these people that will come at someone so hard and so aggressively with all this. And that's partly what led to the conversation that we're going to have on Thursday or on Wednesday here on this on the podcast with about what's going on in the abuse and the reaction to transgender kids in our society, both from the Texas governor and in schools and all the other places. So Paula Williams will be our guest here. I mean, this is what's going on. And so schools have become the place where the anti-masking people are kicking in.
And a lot of times they don't even have kids in the school. That's the crazy part to me, that these people show up to school board meetings and whatever. They don't have a student in the school. They don't even have kids.
Well, and that's the thing that makes you say, so what is it that, like, what are you doing here if you don't have kids? Because it's never been about kids. Right. It's been about the power of the federal government to put mandates on individuals and families, and then to have authority. And this is why the Department of Education has been so restricted from actually putting any kind of standards in place. Or funding, even funding in place. That's why all of our funding for schools are in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Our teachers are about to go on strike tomorrow if they don't get a contract renegotiated.
Good for them.
It all has to go, regardless of what they want. Good
idea what they want, but they deserve it.
Right. Doesn't matter. Give them what they want, and I'm in that camp too. I'm like, look, schools should, like, at the end of the year be like, what are we going to do with the extra $4 that we had at the end of? They should never have to run out of money. They should just have enough, but they can't get it from the federal government because Congress has put restrictions in place of where federal dollars can go when it comes to education. It has to come through states, and that has to come through local entities, because the big negotiation, the big argument has been keep the federal government out of our schools.
Right.
Keep your government.
And largely it is. It's almost entirely up to states what curriculum and what is actually taught in the classrooms. And so all the states' rights arguments are like, well, that's kind of what it is. So I don't know what level of freedom you're hoping to get to, but
and that's where if people want more on this conversation, our little chit chat we had about libertarians, we'll take you down this road. It starts with the federal government, keep the federal government out. And then it moves to the governor of the state, keep the governor out of our schools. And then it moves to the county. Don't tell the county, have the county tell you. It gets down to the local school board. And now where it has moved is, I don't want the school board telling me what my child's going to read, what their education is going to be.
Or even what's going to be available in the library.
Now it's the individual parent. So these people are wanting to pass these things like a parent's right to decide their kid, almost like it's homeschool delivered through the public education system.
Yeah.
So it starts with keep the federal government out, and then keep the state government out, and then keep the county government out, and then keep the school board out. And now it's just down to each individual parent. And that's the logic of where it goes. And in my view, all of these keep the government out of my business. They all move in that ultimately in that direction. And then in the end, no one actually wants that, right? You want the schools to be funded by the power of the government taking through legal taxation the money to pay for education of kids. You don't want only people who have children in schools making decisions about schools or paying for schools. That would be a very bad way to run schools, right? Because any given parent would be involved for, I guess, 12 to 25 years, depending on how they spend spread out their given children. So that's not what we do. We don't do education via parent demand. Now that, it might make somebody listen or not listen to a episode of a podcast. It cost the guy running for governor in Virginia, the governorship of Virginia, when he said, actually, parents, shouldn't be telling schools what to teach. And people blew their minds.
Yeah.
Because, and look, here's the other thing, Dan. Truth be told, I mean, your betrothed is a school teacher, right? Your wife, your partner. I don't know how you guys refer. I don't know. People refer to anything anymore. I mean, I just call somebody, wife or husband. What grade does she teach? Are you willing to?
Seventh grade social studies.
Okay. How many students does she have?
She has like 140 throughout the day. So
okay, so of the 140 students, how many of those parents? Let's say there's 280 parents, give or take a few. How many of those parents do you think know your wife's name? And know she's a seventh grade?
Like maybe 3.
I mean, somebody who had 4 kids go through school. I was hard pressed. I saw at the mall by our house back when our kids were in school. They had they used to put ads up and then things like how to find your way around the mall, little maps. Mm-hmm. They had this one ad campaign that had pictures of famous people. I don't know, musicians or athletes, and it said, do you know her name? And I don't know who it was, somebody, Marilyn Monroe or something, and then some famous athlete. And then the bottom says, can you name your child's 3rd grade teacher? It's like, nope.
Yeah. I saw a meme that was like, you didn't show up for the parent teacher conference. You didn't sign up for the PTO. You didn't respond to emails. But all of a sudden you want input on what books we read and what curriculum. Like, okay, you weren't engaged at all, but now you want total control.
And I felt like we were pretty engaged parents. I mean, my wife was even more engaged than I was, and actually led up a little committee to try to get more healthy food for school lunches, which ultimately turned into removing the vending machines, which caused our children in their school years all kinds of angst as the other
Your mom
kids
did this to us.
Your mom. Yeah, so something you probably, you don't, as a teenager, you don't want your parents taking credit for, even though they had something to do with it. All of that to say, there's just so much that doesn't make sense. And it's not about the individual kid or the individual parent or the individual book. It's about who gets to say and what's happening.
Right.
And then to hear these folks, and I'm referring to them now in derogatory these folks terms, but hearing these folks who are all against schools and all of this, doing it on some kind of moral grounds, just really,
grinds my gears.
Grinds my gears. Hey, you know what else ground my gears? Okay, so last night at, I don't know, 10:30, I'm sitting on my couch, the very same couch that I still own where I had an emotional, life-changing meltdown watching the election of Donald Trump happen. I had my hands pressing against my eyes, trying to relieve the pressure in the back of my head, having watched Bill Barr be interviewed by Lester Holt on NBC. And let me just say, if this podcast ever interests you for a moment, you should watch that interview with Lester Holt. Watch the whole thing. I don't know how you get to watch it. Now, I don't know if it's going to be in bits and pieces on the internet or whatever. I recorded it on a DVR because, that's what 55-year-olds do. It was so disturbing, Dan. I cannot tell you. I mean, I was saying to Shelley, I said, here's what I know from all of my years of being a pastor and doing personal people work. One should be concerned when they're saying out loud too often, those people are just crazy, because you're probably the one who's crazy when you think everybody is crazy. If you're regularly saying, "Oh, I don't know," they got to. That's probably a moment where you stop and look and think, maybe I've lost my way. Bill Barr is, by all accounts, an extraordinarily accomplished person. He has been the Attorney General of the United States of America twice. He is an accomplished lawyer. He is a smart person. He is well-traveled and well-informed. And this interview was terrifying. Among the highlights, when Lester Holt said to him, let's talk about what you call the other big lie. And Bill Barr laughs and goes, oh, which one? And Lester Holt says, well, the one you write about in your book, the big lie that Black Lives Matter. He goes, oh, yeah, I think that's totally a cop-out. I think it's totally a big lie. Black Lives Matter. And then he goes into this thing about the statistics don't hold up. Police arrests don't happen more in these places. And then Lester Holt presses hard and says, do you not recognize that there's systems that are racist in our society that are holdovers and built-in biases? And he said, no, I think racism is an individual personal thing in someone's heart. Police are not racist.
That's the cop-out. It's just an individual action. Can't be a system. Ugh.
So that's in there, right? And look, somebody can agree or disagree with the phrase Black Lives Matter. They can agree or disagree with the organization. They can cheer on the movement as I do and feel like you're part of it, or you can distance yourself from it. For sure, every movement should take every critique that it deserves. Of course, absolutely. When someone with the level of accomplishment and world experience as Bill Barr says, not only with a straight face, but with a chuckle in his voice, systemic racism is the big lie.
Wow.
Chilling.
Yeah, and to be the top lawyer of the United States government saying that.
Chief law enforcement officer, duties given from the president as the chief law enforcement officer. These two guys, who was the attorney general during the racial reckoning of 2020, who was the attorney general when Trump cleared Lafayette Square, or they had it cleared, and then he marched out there with Trump and stood with him when Trump held up the Bible, and now says in the interview, I didn't want to be there, but didn't have the emotional or positional or human capacity to say no.
Yeah.
Who has been the attorney general, Bill Barr, under George H.W. Bush and then under Trump, and said, so I know the difference, and said, I was in the White House when I was the attorney general the first time, 6 or maybe 7 times. I was in the Oval Office scores of time with Trump. That's not supposed to happen. And Bill Barr can't seem to not let it happen. At another point, I'm going to rant for a second. At another point, Bill Barr literally says, I told Trump, I think you're going to lose this election if you keep going on and on about, this and that, in 2020. The attorney general is not supposed to be giving the presidential candidate political advice.
Right.
Like, the things he's willing to say in this interview are so remarkably out of step with what I thought any legitimate attorney general would ever do or say. Like, look, I know that Republican friends of mine, they are all up about Eric Holder, and they're all up about Janet Reno, and they are ready to deep dive you on attorney general misbehavior.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they've got a point, right? Bill Clinton shouldn't have been on an airplane with Loretta Lynch, for sure. That's just the Clintons being Clintons and ruining things. But this Bill Barr deal, this is other level altogether. And he's going after Trump, and he literally says in the interview, in the walking, part of the interview, Lester Holt said, well, but you supported him in 2020. And he said, yeah, I still thought that even with all of his problems, even with all the things that his policies were still better than what would have been the alternative with Joe Biden.
Good grief. And I think I read that he would vote for Trump again in 2024 with
He was-
reservations.
He was like lawyerly nuanced, and of course, I'm listening with an ear and asking my wife to pause it and saying, "I just got to stop for a second and just get this." He would say things like, "Are you going to support Trump again, Lester?" And Barr would say something similar to, "I don't think he's the person that should be, followed in the primary." Basically giving himself a window. But if he gets the nomination, then of course I'm going to support him, because all in all, at the end of the day, I am just a Republican that will just do Republican things, no matter Republican what.
Mm-hmm.
It is so disturbing. As bad as Jeff Sessions was, with the God tells people to do what the president tells them to do. That's why we're going to separate families from their children for coming to this country and seeking asylum nonsense.
Right.
As horrible as he was, this Bill Barr thing and him justifying why he was talking about, writing his 4-page synopsis of the Mueller report before people had a chance to see it, and all of it. He is apologetic about nothing. He is rude to Trump. He is just a partisan player and talks about himself that way. At one point he says, no, I'm kind of ruining it. People are going to think they don't have to watch it. I'm going to watch it again. It is so stunning to believe that this man is saying these things right now while he's out pitching a book. So he's just on a media tour. He wants to say these things. Mm-hmm. He's not being accidentally caught. He's written about them in his book. He says at one point, Trump's yelling at him about something. And then Trump says, okay, now I'm going to go tweet. And as he's walking out of the room, Trump turns back to Barr and says, "You know what makes a great tweet?" And Barr says, "What?" And he says, "Just the right amount of crazy." And then Bill Barr starts laughing. I thought that one was kind of funny. And I was like, this is the Attorney General saying, I thought it was funny that the President of the United States will use his public platform to say crazy things. Mm-hmm. And I thought, not only is that funny, that doesn't disqualify him from being the president.
Yeah.
Now he differs with him on the results of the election. He says this is just clear. He was poorly served. He lets Trump off the hook by he was just taken in by a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, that were around him. So what does that say about Trump? That he's so feeble of mind and will that he listens to Rudy Giuliani and Jason Miller? He's the president of the United States, for crying out loud. He's got access everything he needs and wants to know about nearly anything that has to do with the election and his campaign. So it is so disturbing to know that, and this is why I just sat with my head in my hand, just thinking maybe I'm on the edge of just slipping into, Goofsville here, because I mean, I watch too much TV on Sundays, including Chris Christie and then Bill Barr. And I'm just like, these are both people I disagree with so profoundly, but they're not fools, right? Oh, one of them. No, they're both fools. It's foolishness at the highest level. So I don't know. Yeah. I'm going to have a very hard time. It was like scales falling off my eyes again. And this is why I find it just so dangerously impossible that Republicans get to be in charge of the federal government again. Because if guys like Bill Barr are not legitimate, then what are we stuck with? I mean, truly, a guy with that kind of pedigree should be like former attorney generals. You should be able to bring them in and be like, okay, we're going to be all right, because there are just people who care about something more than just the sheer politics and the stupidity of this and that. Yeah. And they have a backbone and they'll do the right thing.
Well, that was the whole premise of the Trump presidency, right? That the grown-ups in the room will temper Trump and everything will be okay. But the grown-ups in the room were people like Bill Barr.
At one point on June 1st, when the protests of police violence and racial violence in the country, this is June 1st, 2020, are happening, Trump brings into the Oval Office Bill Barr, the head of DHS, the head of the FBI, all these people, lines them all up. And Bill Barr says, he just looks at all of us and he's screaming at us, you're a effing loser, an effing loser. You're an effing loser. We got to, like, just raging at these guys, calling them losers. Bill Barr keeps working for him.
Yeah.
Bill Barr doesn't come out and say, look, I just want to make it clear to the people of the United States what's going on, how this, like, there is, and then just hauled out and held up the Bible, and that's all in that same window of time. And General Milley is another guy in there. He's screaming at a 5-star general, you are an effing loser. I mean, he's so unhinged, Trump, by Bill Barr's statements, and then Barr does nothing about it. Even when Trump demands his resignation on December 1st after the election, when Barr is saying there's no fraud, then Trump says don't resign, and Barr stays around for another 2 weeks.
Like the lack of spine and self-dignity, like just to let this guy walk all over you and say horrible things to you or about your wife, like Ted Cruz continuing to be his lapdog after Trump made fun of his wife. And I can't imagine that.
I cannot imagine. I mean, these are behaviors truly that I think and hope that I would quit any job being treated that way. Yeah. And I know, look, there are a lot of people who are abused by people in their family. They're abused by, men and women bosses. This just goes on. I know it. But I want to believe that someone like Bill Barr doesn't need the job any longer. Mm-hmm. And don't give me this stuff about like, oh, well, I was just, if it wasn't for me, they would bring in someone worse than me. Like, take off your superhero cape and just stand up and say the right thing. And apparently he was on the show today and on the Good Morning America show or whatever. And I saw a headline that the interviewer there pressed him hard. Like, don't you think the people of the United States deserve to know before the election what you knew about him and about his behavior and about how, like, I get it for political appointees at your general sense, but the attorney general is supposed to be, as the head of the Justice Department, protected from all that. Mm-hmm. They're not supposed to get involved, just like the director of the FBI are supposed to be protected from all this. I started listening today to the podcast Slow Burn. Do you know this podcast? You familiar with it? Okay. So they tell like long stories. In the second season, the first season is about the Nixon period and about a woman who was literally kidnapped because she had information about Nixon and held in a room. And then now they rolled out that she had lost her mind and everything. It's just an incredible story. Wow. And the second season is about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And so being dragged all the way back into all that stuff going on with the Clintons and just all the drama and the thing that led to Whitewater and all the investigations that were going on all the way through it. And the big thing, from Bob Dole and others, was, the Justice Department is independent. You have to have an independent counsel, independent investigator looks into this. And everything for Republicans used to be all about independence, all the way up until Trump. And then it's just like, nope, now nobody cares. Nobody wants to bring it up or not. It doesn't matter. The number of times, I mean, how many times have you seen Merrick Garland with Biden? How many times did you ever see Barack Obama with the Attorney General? Hardly ever. Google images of Trump with Bill Barr. They're just endless. Endless. He touts him out. He pulls him around. He calls him in. He brings him into the office. He's got him in there when there's 20 people in the Oval Office just hanging around talking about things. It's just running like a casino. Just bizarre behavior.
Yeah.
All of which, the point being, Bill Barr says, I thought this was totally inappropriate, totally wrong. I wish he hadn't done that. I wish he wouldn't have said these things. I told him multiple times. Like, he raises all of it as
But
a
I
serious
didn't
problem.
do anything about it.
There it is.
Yeah.
And what did I do? Not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I didn't even resign until the end of December.
Yeah.
And look, it's not because of fealty to Donald Trump personally with Bill Barr. Bill Barr is one of these guys, and he talks about it in his book, he talks about it in the interview. He's one of the people that comes out of the Roger Stone crowd, out of the Nixon crowd, that believes that the presidency was weakened after Watergate, and they believe in a powerful executive branch. So he's like, this is just about the office of the president, and that's it. That's what I care about. In the back of Bill Barr's mind, I think he makes this perfectly clear. He's willing to deal with whatever president he has to, because he wants to make sure that the presidency is given ultimate authority in our federal government.
Right. He's willing to tolerate all the questionable, illegal nonsense as long as it maintains power.
And then wants to come out and have everybody know. But I thought he was wrong about January, about the election. I think he's responsible for January 6th. But he is quick to note, but not at a criminal level. He's not criminally responsible.
In a broad sense.
Yeah.
As the headline says.
Yeah.
Well, Trump wasn't too happy about this. Trump sent a 3-page letter to Lester Holt ripping on Bill Barr. No surprise, really, that anything that could be deemed as negative, Trump has a problem with. But Barr dismissed the letter as childish in a Monday morning interview.
Well, apparently one of the lines on this, in the bullet point here says that Trump claims that his Democratic rivals, quote, broke Bill Barr like a trainer breaks his horse. I mean, look, the guy does have a way with words. Yeah. See, and then he's now just pounding on Bill Barr as if and he actually hated Bill Barr all along, because Bill Barr would not indict James Comey. That was the thing that really got it. I mean, he wanted him to be, going after all these people and doing all these other things. And the idea, look, and Whalen makes this point that, Barr was Trump's lapdog. In some ways, I think so. And in other ways, I think Bill Barr didn't care at all about Donald Trump. Didn't think much of him, didn't care for him, didn't respect him. He's just doing this thing because he wants to bolster the presidency to a point that I think is radical and dangerous. And he doesn't have the personal wherewithal to stand up to Trump. I think that's slightly different and a deeper moral character flaw than, hey, I'm just really into the guy. It's about Donald. It wasn't about Donald for Bill Barr. It was, he wasn't going to stand up to Trump for myriad reasons. Probably because he, wanted another crack at this, trying to protect the power of the presidency. I did see a clip of the letter that Trump wrote to Barr. And in the letter, it was typed, the letter that he wrote to Lester Holt about the Bill Barr interview. Mm-hmm. It was typed and said, "Dear Mr. Holt," at the top. Trump had crossed out "Dear Mr. Holt" and wrote in marker, "Lester."
I saw that too.
Just a little, piece of the mind of this twice impeached and failed presidential candidate Donald Trump is, I don't want to even call him Mr. Holt.
Yeah.
I'm going to call him Lester.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever's going on there is this. Yeah. All right.
Well, speaking of twice impeached, that first impeachment, as people may recall, was for attempting to extort the president of Ukraine. And President Zelensky has since become like a worldwide hero for standing up to Russia. Ukraine, of course, is still under attack. Russians are shelling nuclear reactors. They're shelling civilian hospitals and apartment buildings. They're shooting civilians in the street. It's just horrible. And Zelensky is, again, just begging for more support.
Yeah. And he's only going to get a portion of what they really need. There is no NATO country that's going to put planes in the air to create a no-fly zone. The United States isn't going to do it. Poland's not going to do it. Germany's not going to do it. Because what the option is, if a Russian plane violates the no-fly zone, the way that's enforced is to shoot the plane down.
Mm-hmm.
That then is Poland or Germany, the United States, in military conflict with Russia. And it's been decided by all those countries, we will do what we can to protect Ukraine short of military conflict with Russia. It's a real problem. They will do what they can to give Ukrainians all the support that they need. But that line and the thing that Zelensky is asking for, he's not going to get.
But this idea that, like, well, we can't get in that sort of shooting match with Russia because then Russia will view it as an act of war. Putin has said that these sanctions and the military support for Ukraine is an act of war. So we've already crossed whatever imaginary line there is for Putin to think that the world is at war with him.
That's a good point. But Putin's belief that something's an act of war versus the rest of the
international community
recognizing it's an act of war. No, because these sanctions aren't that. Shooting down an aircraft is that.
Yeah.
And it's look, this is where despots like Putin, or maybe what's going to happen with China and Taiwan, these are problems. And it's also complicated because of the nature of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. Like, look, we're all hearing the beautiful stories of people in Russia and people in Ukraine feeling like they're part of the same people group, right? That's, Russians are saying, like, this is our family. Well, that's because when it was the Soviet Union, they were part of the same union, Ukraine is not as independent from Russia as, say, Poland is. There's a different history there. So it's contentious in a different way. It's a unique relationship. I'm not giving any space for Putin to take over the country any more than that Saddam Hussein had the right to go to Kuwait. Similar argument from Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait. That you don't get to say, well, 100 years ago, we were part of the same country, so it's really ours, and I'm just going to go take it back. Putin doesn't get to do this. And it's different, Ukraine and Russia, than any other country in recent history. So it's just complicated, and is going to remain complicated. To your point about Zelensky, who would have thought this guy was gonna stand up like this? Like, he truly is a former comedian.
Yeah. Who
played on a comedy show, a sitcom sort of show, that he was the president. And so, like, here an actor comedian becomes the president of this country, and when he needs to act heroically, does it. We
Steps up.
We had a reality television star who did just the opposite. So, and to your point, that he's the guy that Trump was trying to bully into being his political hack, is now the guy that's like, yeah, I stand up to people like you, as it turns out. Really something. And, look, if something tragic happens to him, that is just going to be.
I'm so nervous for him. I'm praying for him. Think about him and everybody.
Yeah.
Because he's in the crosshairs. Putin is out for blood.
Yeah.
There have been like at least 3 assassination attempts that have been thwarted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and then look, the Ukrainian people, that image, I don't know if you saw the one where the Russian tank or armored vehicle was coming through town and the guy with the Ukrainian flag jumped on it. It was waving the big flag. Oh, that's a great, I mean, just
The
doing what they can to fight back.
And the nonviolent resistance has been just wild, doing stuff that I can't imagine doing. I saw a video just today, Russian troops coming down the street and a big group of unarmed Ukrainian civilians marching toward them. The Russians start, shooting in the air saying, "Turn away." And this one guy's like, "No, we're coming through. You're going back." And the rest of the civilians follow him, and they push these soldiers back without violence. And
I do wonder what the Russian soldiers are starting to think about what their rules of combat are. You think about when the U.S. invaded another country in order to create regime change, right? In both Iraq and sort of in Afghanistan, that was sort of the plan. Very complicated, mixed up, like who can you shoot and who can you not, and all this stuff. Like, these Russians are really in trouble because they probably don't have any freedom to fire on a group like that. It's all being recorded. They know it's going to get out. Like, they're really, the idea that now a social media driven and constant flow of data and information era is the context for this is really different.
Yes.
Like this wedding that, we have that little graphic for this wedding, seeing this article about she walked down the aisle in her fatigues and all the people in their wedding party are standing out there with, citizens with guns in their hands. As somebody who, doesn't appreciate a lot of gun violence, watching these guys stand there and say, but we're still going to get married. There's still a future. And if we have to get married in the middle of this war, we're going to do it. And, we're going to incorporate this in. These little acts of resistance.
Yeah, moments of beauty and hope. Yeah,
incredible. Do you watch John
Oliver?
John Oliver?
Yeah.
Did you see this week when
I did?
Or a week ago, they tell this. There's this video clip of this Ukrainian older woman.
Oh my
with
gosh!
Flower seeds, who goes up, which is apparently the national flower, maybe, of Ukraine.
I think so.
And she goes up to this Russian soldier and is just yelling at him, like, "You get out of here! You have no business to be here!" Like, she's just giving him an earful, and he's like, "Ma'am, just get away. Nothing's going to come from this. I'm not making any decisions. Just don't make something bad happen." And she says, gives him these sunflower seeds and says, "Put these sunflower seeds in your pocket so that when you die on this soil, something beautiful grows up." Like the meanest curse that there's this great Irish blessing that I heard that you say to people on their birthdays, especially when they're a bit older. You say, "May you be born in a casket made from 100-year-old tree that was planted today." Right. It's great, like, lyrical way of saying, "May you live for another 100 years."
Yeah.
This is like the opposite of that. Put these sunflower seeds in your pocket, so when you die on our soil, we have some beautiful flowers that grow up in this spot.
Yeah.
Like, that is just, and it was recorded again and then shared around, and it's really quite something. So you just, and then in the midst of it too, and this is what I'm a little bit afraid of, all these stories of human thriving are so inspiring, and it's not fundamentally what could be the outcome of all this. It could be that Putin just presses all the way into Kiev and kills the political leadership now, takes over this country, and punishes the citizens of Ukraine for 2 decades.
Yeah.
That is also what absolutely could come from all of this. And that the international community will not keep its backbone. They will build this thing over time and just kowtow and just say, okay, it's all settled fact now, and let's just see what we can do to make the best of it. Because Putin has done so many things, and people still just, treat him like he's legitimate, including the U.S. government.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very worried that he's going to get tired of being the loser in this and escalate it way more. And the death toll is going to rise, and NATO and the West are going to stand by. Not going to intervene.
Yeah, and say, look, we're going to draw a different line around Poland and around Germany, and yes, for sure. But Ukraine,
you're on your own.
And I heard a strong critique of Biden that I was going to look up before today and forgot to do it. That even though Trump said he wanted to hold up weaponry to Ukraine for them to follow Rudy Giuliani's plan to get the Ukrainian government to say that Hunter Biden was involved in illegal activities to help Trump win the election. I mean, it's just cockamamie as all that is. Mm-hmm. That the Trump administration actually gave the weapons, sent military weapons.
Eventually released it, yeah.
And that the Biden administration, when it came in, paused or halted those weapons. I don't know if that's true, because the kind of person I heard it from, I don't know that it's always truthfulness that I hear from this political pundit. But that could be a thing. That could be a real problem for, that if the United States didn't help Ukraine in the last year be as prepared for this eventuality as it was. That's something that the Biden administration is going to have to answer for. And making up for it by getting $1 billion sent to Ukraine immediately is not sufficient.
Yeah,
you got to own up to it if that indeed was the case. Mm-hmm. And another side note, I don't hear Joe Manchin, I don't hear anybody in the Republican Party, I don't hear anybody in the Democratic, fiscal crowd saying, how are we going to pay for the money we're sending to Ukraine? What's the pay for?
Yeah.
How are we going to pay for the $1 billion that we just sent them? We can't spend $1 billion apparently in the United States on early childhood education because can't figure out how to pay for it.
Right.
Inflation. We can spend $1 billion in a weekend for Ukraine. So again, it just focuses the mind on this shifting rationale all the time on the get your fiscal house in order. We can't spend more money than we have.
Right.
False narrative that comes out of because the United States government can spend all the money that it wants and we'll figure out, what its impact is on the economy and then do a dozen things to remedy that impact if it's a negative kind of impact. Mm-hmm. And don't act like, well, that's money being spent in another country, not in our country. That's not how it works, because they're actually buying the things from the United States. They're buying it from U.S. businesses.
Yeah.
So a lot of the money's tied to that demand, in fact.
Right.
So.
And well, we should probably wrap it up, but we didn't even get into like gas prices and how that whole thing works and doesn't work, and Biden being blamed for gas prices. Did you know that less than 2% of our oil in the U.S. comes from Russia? Russian oil doesn't impact our oil supply, but no. OPEC deciding to crank up their gas prices does impact it.
Yes. So gas prices are impacted by crude oil, by refinery costs, by transportation costs. I saw a meme the other day that was, here's the things that cause gas prices to be wherever they are and why it's a movable commodity. And there's the four things, none of which the president of the United States has anything to do with, other than the overall context of the general price of oil. Mm-hmm. And, look, the Biden administration is going to have to figure out if they do something that the smart environmentalists don't want the U.S. doing, which is to start to extract more oil from the ground in the United States. And that's something that the Republicans very much want them to do, and they're baiting Biden into it.
Well, that even seems like a false debate, because I just heard the press secretary, Jen Psaki, say that actually oil companies have 9,000 unused permits within the U.S. that they're just not using. So they're...
Yeah, okay. So here's what I understand is what's going on, though. Those permits are for getting oil from places that are more expensive than opening up these federal lands where they say we can get oil cheaper. So again, this is the Republicans not wanting federal lands to be protected and saying the gas companies, oil companies won't go get it with those 9,000 permits because it doesn't make financial sense, but they will go get it from these other places because it's cheaper. That's the argument. And, this is like, well, because you can't figure out how to run your business. And wouldn't it be great? So their answer is, wouldn't it be great if we were just extracting oil from our ground? This is Republicans, and people care about the environment are saying, wouldn't it be great if we didn't need to take so much oil? And then they're saying, the Republicans are saying, well, we're not going to get there in the next 6 months. And then the environmentalists are saying, but if we don't start doing it now, if we keep putting off the next 6 months, then we're never going to get to we've been at this for 10 years. Like you have to start somewhere, and you have to start now, and you can't let every single gas fluctuation and crisis.
Right.
But I just read this morning that the U.S. has sent an envoy to Venezuela to see if they can lift the sanctions on Venezuela that the U.S. has on there, because did you know that Venezuela has more oil resources than any other country?
I have heard that.
So
we'll quickly forget what
what
crimes that guy's committed against his own people in the world.
And so, the other reason that they want to do this and they want to drop oil prices is so that Russia can't make more money off selling less oil, because they're already cutting the amount of, look, if the U.S. says that the U.S. will stop its 2% of its oil consumption, which is still a lot of oil. It's only 2%, but we just use so much. And other European countries also stop importing oil from Russia, that will really collapse their economy.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people now who are starting to say about Russia, you don't want Russia to turn into verging on a failed state and a failed economy. Like ultimately, yes, you need to stop this war with Ukraine, but you don't want to collapse this thing to the point that, no future for Russia exists in Russians' minds.
Too big to fail.
Too big to fail. I forgot all about that. Too big to fail. That's a good callback.
Well, we'll probably get into more of this tomorrow on the Politics Day, and
yeah, probably. Well, thanks for indulging my brain meltdown with Bill Barr.
And thanks to everyone in the chat. Very active chat.
Mike, Dave, Waylon, Janice, Dean, Kevin, all of you, John. Wow, a lot going on over there. All right. Yeah. So politics tomorrow, faith, and why people are being so mean to transgender people, especially at school level. Mm-hmm. And Thursday, a great feel good story Thursday about bikes and guitars. And hey, by the way, if you're still listening, you're somebody who cares a lot about what we do around here. So I'll tell you, we're going to be in Pittsburgh, Columbus, Ohio, South Bend, Indiana, Holland, Michigan, Madison, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 2 weeks, starting on the 18th through the 27th, and all those places. Go to voteCommonGood.com, where we're running events around the call for common good immigration, reflecting back on the bike ride that we did and the people that we met. And we're traveling with a bunch of those people, and they're going to be worth it. We'll be live streaming all that as well as in person, but come see us in person. Send your friends, send your family, grab your auntie, and see us at the Traveling Roadshow. Is that good, Dan? Anything else?
That's great.
All right. See ya.